My phone vibrated against the nightstand at 7 minutes past 3 in the morning. The screen lit up with my daughter's name, but the message made my blood turn to ice. Mum. My card declined at the club. Send me $3,000 right now, or I swear you will never see me again. I analyze financial fraud for a living, yet as I stared at those words, I realized the cost of this transaction was not money. It was her life. My name is Veronica Hale. I am 56 years old, and for the last 20 years, I have been a lead fraud analyst at Solace Wave Analytics. I live alone in a house that has felt too large since the divorce, surrounded by the quiet hum of suburbia, where the biggest scandal is usually a neighbor leaving their trash cans out a day late. I am good at my job because I understand patterns. I know that chaos always leaves a digital footprint. But at 7 minutes past 3 in the morning, the chaos did not appear on my dual monitor setup at the office. It vibrated violently against my nightstand. I woke with a start, my heart hammering against my ribs before my eyes even focused. The room was pitch black, save for the aggressive white glow of my smartphone. It was my daughter. Lena. My thumb swiped across the screen, and the message that greeted me made a heavy, cold, stone drop straight into the bottom of my stomach. Mom. My card declined at the club. Send me $3,000 right now, or I swear you will never see me again. I sat up, clutching the duvet. My first instinct was a flash of maternal anger. Lena and I had been walking on eggshells around each other for months, and this felt like just another impulsive, expensive disaster. But as the sleep cleared, the anger was replaced by a sharp, professional dread. The tone was wrong. It was too sterile, too direct. I pressed the call button immediately. There was no ringtone, just an abrupt connection to a wall of sound. Heavy bass distorted the line, the kind of thumping, rhythmic noise that rattles your teeth even through a speaker. Lena! I shouted into the phone. Lena! Where are you? For a second, I heard nothing but the music. Then, a voice came through, breathless and distant, as if the phone was being held away from the mouth. Make it fast, or they will be pissed. It was a woman's voice, but it sounded hollow, drained of the defiance Lena usually carried. Before I could scream her name again, the line went dead. I stared at the black screen, my hands beginning to tremble. I forced myself to breathe. I forced the panic down and let the analyst take over. I opened the message thread again and studied the text. My daughter is 23 years old. She texts in run-on sentences. She uses semicolons incorrectly and floods our chats with nonsensical memes. She never uses proper capitalization for the word mom. And she certainly never spells out the words $3,000 or right now without an emoji to soften the blow. This message had typos. Yes, but they were calculated. The syntax was foreign. It looked like a template. A memory flashed in my mind, sharp and painful. Last week, standing in this very kitchen, Lena had thrown her hands up in frustration. You treat everything like a case file, Mum. You are great at checking data, but you do not understand anything about my life. You do not get how the world works downtown. Maybe she was right. I did not know her world, but I knew data. I opened my banking app, my fingers flying across the glass. I pulled up the joint account I still monitored. The transaction history scrolled past, a litany of excess that made my jaw tighten. The vault, VIP experience, rooftop access, bottle service. In the last 3 weeks, She had burned through more money than she made in 3 months. This was not just partying. This was a bust-out scheme. I had seen it 100 times on my screens at work. Someone was running her card, or worse. Someone had convinced her she was part of a lifestyle she could not afford, only to tighten the noose when the limit hit 0. The phone buzzed again in my hand. A second message. You have 10 minutes. Wire 3,000 to this account, or we will make sure she pays her debt another way. Below the text was a routing number for an online-only bank I did not recognize, followed by a string of account digits. I stared at the 10-minute deadline. The house was silent, but the noise in my head was deafening. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to pay it. Just pay the money. Get her back. Deal with the debt later. But the fraud investigator in me knew better. I knew that if I sent that money, I would verify that she was a valuable asset. I would prove that there was a frantic mother on the other end who would bleed cash on command. They wanted a victim. They wanted a terrified 56-year-old woman who would click send and pray. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. 3:14 in the morning. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The trembling in my hands stopped as a cold, hard clarity settled over me. If they think I am just a nice old lady, I whispered to the empty room, they have chosen the wrong person. I flipped open my laptop, the screen casting a harsh blue light across my dining room table. My fingers moved automatically, bypassing the panic in my chest to engage the muscle memory of 20 years in fraud detection. I typed the routing number from the text message into my private search tool. The results populated instantly, confirming my worst suspicions. It was a mule account, opened less than 48 hours ago at a digital-only bank that I had personally investigated for money laundering 6 months prior. The account holder was likely a phantom, a stolen identity used solely to siphon cash before vanishing. I pulled up the transaction logs from Lena's card again, but this time I looked at them through the lens of a case file. The pattern was unmistakable. It mimicked the credit farming schemes I saw on my monitor every day, a young person seduced into a circle of high spenders, encouraged to swipe for the group to build status, only to be left with the bill and a terrifying ultimatum when the limit hit the ceiling. I needed to buy time. I grabbed my phone and typed a reply, deliberately letting my fingers stumble to mimic a terrified mother. I am wiring now. Just do not hurt her. I hit send. The response came back within 10 seconds, too fast to be typed by a human reading my plea. It was a script. Hurry. Send screenshot of confirmation. They were not negotiating. They were processing a transaction. I dialed Lena's number again. This time, the line clicked open. She is a big girl. Mom, a male voice said. He sounded young, bored, and chillingly calm. She plays. She pays. 10 minutes. Let me speak to her, I shouted, but he had already lowered the phone. I strained my ears, analyzing the background noise before the line went dead. The bass was heavy, but the acoustics were tight, lacking the echo of a warehouse or the tinny sound of a dive bar. I heard the distinct clink of heavy crystal on glass and the heavy thud of a soundproof door sealing shut. Then, a bartender's voice cut through the mix, shouting an order for Blue Label over the music. This was not a random club. This was a high-end rooftop lounge. I switched tabs to Instagram. Lena blocked me from her main stories, but I had a burner account for this exact reason. I scrolled through her recent tags until I found it. Eden Vault. It was a fortress of a club in the center of Riverton, known for its exclusivity and its no cameras policy. I needed a name. I dialed Maya, Lena's best friend since high school. Maya was a night shift nurse, the only person Lena still confided in. She picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with exhaustion. Ms. Hale, is everything okay, Maya? I need you to tell me the truth, I said, keeping my voice steady. Who has Lena been seeing at Eden Vault? There was a hesitation on the other end. I told her to be careful. Ms. Hale. She started hanging out with this new crew. Rich kids. The guy running the table is named Dante Rivas. What do you know about him? Lena said he is magic, Maya whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She said Dante can get any card approved, even with a trash credit score. He said he fixes things. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. He can get any card approved. That was not a pickup line. That was the underground slogan for synthetic identity fraud. Dante was not a boyfriend. He was a recruiter. I hung up. If I sent the money, they would know I was solvent. They would bleed me dry, and they would keep Lena as collateral for the next payment. I looked at the countdown. 6 minutes left. I turned back to my laptop. I logged into the SolaceWave developer sandbox, a secure environment we used to simulate banking attacks. I quickly coded a visual replica of a wire transfer confirmation screen, complete with a transaction ID that looked legitimate but led nowhere. It was a delay tactic, a digital sleight of hand to make them think they had won while I moved into position. I stood up and walked to the hallway closet. I pulled on my heavy coat and stepped into my leather boots. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, her lines deep under the harsh hall light, but the fear in her eyes had hardened into something cold and sharp. If you want to play the credit game, I whispered to the empty house, we will play by my rules. I grabbed the keys to my old sedan and opened the front door, stepping out into the biting cold of the early morning. The transition from my neighborhood to the highway was like moving between two different planets. I drove past silent houses wrapped in slumber, their porches lit by timed safety lights and early Christmas decorations that blinked in rhythm with nothing. But ahead of me, the horizon was already stained purple and orange by the light pollution of downtown Riverton. The glow was not welcoming. It looked like a bruise on the night sky. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I know this world. Before I was a senior analyst at SolaceWave, before I spent my days hunting algorithms behind a standing desk, I paid for my degree by tending bar in places that smelled of stale beer and bad decisions. I know that behind the wall of bass and the flashing strobes, there is always a calculation being made. I know that for every girl who thinks she is drinking for free, there is a ledger somewhere tallying a cost she cannot afford. I tapped the voice command on my steering wheel. Call Jamal. Jamal was the best cybersecurity engineer we had. He picked up on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. It is. 3:20 in the morning. The servers better be on fire. I just sent you a packet, I said. My eyes fixed on the road, a mule account and a transaction string. I need you to flag it. Code red. Suspected money laundering and terror financing. There was a pause on the line, the sound of rustling sheets. V. You know the protocol. If I flag a domestic account with a terror tag without a subpoena, I could lose my license. What is this case? It is not a case. Jamal, I said, my voice cracking despite my best effort to hold it together. It is my daughter. The silence on the other end stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. I could hear him breathing, the gears in his head turning as he weighed his career against my desperation. "Okay," he finally said, his voice dropping an octave, shedding the sleepiness. "I will do it. I will push it straight to the federal night desk. Just be careful. Veronica." I hung up just as I reached the edge of the city. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry hornets. I popped the trunk and stepped out into the biting wind. Underneath the spare tire well, tucked inside a rusted toolkit, was a small, locked metal box. I keyed in the combination. Inside lay a snub-nosed revolver, cold and heavy. I had bought it legally 15 years ago when I lived in the country, back when the only thing I feared was a coyote coming after the dog. I stared at the dull metal. I was an analyst. I fought with code and spreadsheets, but logic does not work on wolves. "I hope to God I do not have to use you for anyone tonight," I whispered. I slipped the gun into my purse, feeling its weight drag against my shoulder, and got back in the car. 10 minutes later, I was crawling through the downtown district. The streets were a chaotic parade of the night. Girls in dresses too thin for the weather shivered in line, laughing too loudly, while men in shiny suits watched them with predatory patience. Rideshare drivers idled in rows, their hazard lights blinking in unison. I felt like a ghost, an invisible observer from a different timeline, judging the very world my daughter was drowning in. I slowed down as I approached the address, Eden Vault. It was not flashy like the other clubs. It was a monolith of dark glass, the entrance guarded by heavy velvet ropes and men who looked more like mercenaries than bouncers. The sign was just a small, backlit logo, arrogant in its subtlety. Then I saw it. Parked in a side lot, squeezed between a dumpster and a luxury SUV, was a silver Honda Civic. The hazard lights were still flashing, cutting through the shadows in a rhythmic, silent plea. It was Lena's car. She had not even had time to turn them off. It was the visual confirmation of my worst fear she had not stayed. She had been taken. I killed the engine. The silence inside the car was sudden and suffocating. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I adjusted my scarf, pulling it higher to hide the lines on my neck, trying to look less like a mother and more like a woman who belonged in the dark. "Not Data," I said to myself, my voice flat and hard. "Not models. Tonight, it is just me and you." Veronica stepped into Eden Vault and was immediately assaulted by the atmosphere. The air inside was thick enough to choke on, a suffocating mixture of expensive, sickly sweet perfume, the metallic tang of stale sweat, and the chemical bite of artificial fog. The bass did not just play in the background. It vibrated through the floorboards and rattled her ribcage, syncing her heartbeat to its aggressive, synthetic rhythm. Laser lights sliced through the darkness in chaotic green and purple beams, disorienting her senses and making the crowded room feel like a shifting, underwater nightmare. She approached the entrance, where a hostess stood behind a velvet rope. The woman was impossibly tall and thin, holding a tablet with a look of practiced boredom. She scanned Veronica from her sensible shoes to her worn coat, her lip curling slightly in a silent dismissal. Before the hostess could verbalize the rejection, Veronica straightened her spine and spoke with a cold authority she did not feel. "I am Veronica Rivas, aunt of Dante." She used the name she had extracted from Maya earlier, throwing it out like a grenade. For a second, the air between them froze. The hostility on the face of the hostess vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of terrified civility. "My apologies, Mrs. Rivas. I was not informed of your arrival." The hostess quickly reached under the podium and produced a glowing wristband, fastening it around the wrist of Veronica. It pulsed with a soft gold light. "Please, enjoy the VIP access. Dante is in the back." Veronica walked past the rope, her heart hammering against her ribs. The name was not just a connection. It was a key that unlocked doors and silenced questions. As she moved deeper into the club, she forced herself to observe the machinery of the place. It was not chaotic. It was precise. Black dome cameras studded the ceiling like insect eyes, covering every blind spot. Security guards, built like walls of muscle, stood in the darkest corners, their arms crossed and their eyes scanning the crowd with predatory focus. Waiters moved through the throngs of dancing bodies with fluid, robotic efficiency, trays held high, never spilling a drop. Eden Vault was not a party. It was a highly calibrated engine designed to extract value. She navigated toward the bar, searching for a familiar face in the sea of strangers. The dance floor was packed with young women wearing glowing necklaces that matched the wristbands, laughing too loudly at jokes made by older men in tailored suits. Veronica watched as one of the men handed a black credit card to a bartender. He did not look at the total. He did not even pause. He just kept his hand on the waist of the girl next to him, his fingers tightening possessively. In a secluded VIP booth elevated slightly above the main floor, Veronica spotted him. He matched the description perfectly. He looked to be about 30 years old, wearing a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the top, leaning back against the plush leather with an air of absolute arrogance. A server addressed him as Dante. He held a glass of dark amber liquid, swirling it casually. When the bill came, he waved it away and tossed a card onto the table with a flick of his wrist, a gesture that screamed that money was nothing but paper to him. Veronica turned her gaze away, feeling a wave of nausea, only to witness a scene that stopped her breath. A few feet away, a young girl, no older than 20, was staring at a phone handed to her by a stone-faced waiter. Her face was drained of colour. She pressed the phone to her ear, her hand trembling so violently she could barely hold the device. "Dad, please. Just this one time. I promise I will pay you back." They said. They said I cannot leave until it is cleared. The desperation in her voice was a physical blow to Veronica. It was the same script, the same trap. Veronica realized with horrifying clarity that this place was an assembly line. They recruited young women, dazzled them with the illusion of luxury, trapped them in manufactured debt, and then used their shame and their families as leverage to bleed them dry. She pushed forward, aiming for the VIP section where Dante sat. She needed to get closer. She needed to know if he knew where Lena was. But before she could reach the steps, a massive hand pressed against her chest. A security guard blocked her path, his face impassive. Only invited guests beyond this point. "Ma'am?" Before she could argue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, shielding the screen from the strobe lights. The message was short and brutal. "You have 5 minutes left. We can make her debt go away, or make her disappear." Panic surged through her, cold and sharp. She looked around frantically, her composure cracking. Suddenly, a photographer near the DJ booth triggered a massive flash, illuminating the dark corridor behind the stage for a split second. In that brief explosion of white light, Veronica saw it. A flash of familiar blonde hair, a denim jacket with a patch on the shoulder. It was being dragged by two men into the shadows behind the sound system. Lena Veronica screamed the name, but her voice was swallowed by the deafening bass. The figure was gone, pulled into the darkness, and the clock was ticking down. Veronica pressed her back against the wall. Her eyes locked on the heavy swing door marked with a staff-only placard. A waiter hurried past her, balancing a tray of empty crystal glasses that clattered softly against each other. As he pushed through the door, Veronica seized the split second before the hydraulic arm could seal it shut. She slipped her boot into the gap and slid through the opening, her movements silent and practiced. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The oppressive humidity of the dance floor vanished, replaced by a blast of refrigerated air that smelled of stale beer and industrial cleaner. The thumping bass of the club was muted here, reduced to a dull, rhythmic vibration in the concrete floor. The lighting changed from chaotic lasers to the steady, ominous glow of red exit signs and flickering fluorescent tubes. Down the long, narrow corridor, she heard sounds that the music outside was designed to drown out. There was coarse laughter, the angry rise and fall of an argument, and then the unmistakable sound of a stifled sob coming from behind a steel door at the far end. Veronica crept forward, her rubber soles making no sound on the linoleum. She stopped just outside the metal door, holding her breath to listen. "I told you. I don't have that kind of money." Lena's voice cracked, thin and trembling. "My mum isn't an ATM. She works at a bank. She doesn't own it." A sharp, wet sound cut through the air, a slap. It was followed immediately by the screech of a metal chair dragging across the floor. Veronica flinched physically, her hand flying to her mouth to suppress a gasp. "You owe us $18,000. Lena." It was a man's voice, smooth and terrifyingly calm. It had to be Dante. "We are being nice to you. We are reasonable businessmen. Just $3,000 tonight. Let's see how much Mommy loves you." "She won't do it." Lena sobbed. "Please, just let me go. They always say that." A woman's voice interjected. It was dry, bored, and stripped of all empathy. "This must be Ava. The girls always say no, and the mothers always say they have no money. But in the end, everyone gives up the password. It is just math." Veronica reached for the door handle, her fingers curling around the cold steel. She was ready to storm in, ready to tear them apart with her bare hands if she had to. Then she heard it. Click-clack. It was the distinct, mechanical sound of a pistol slide being racked back. Veronica froze. Her hand hovered over the handle, shaking. She was a mother, but she was not stupid. If she burst in there now, unarmed and outnumbered, she would not save Lena. They would both end up zip-tied to chairs, or worse. She forced herself to step back. She scanned the hallway and spotted a storage closet with its door slightly ajar. She slipped inside, leaving the door cracked just enough to see the corridor. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone. She took a rapid series of photos, the number on the door, the position of the security camera above it, the face of a bouncer who walked past the far end of the hall. Then she opened her voice recorder app and held the phone up, capturing the voices drifting through the thin metal. 2 minutes, Dante, Ava said. If the transfer does not hit, we move to phase 2. Veronica's phone buzzed in her hand. A new message. Time is running out. An image loaded on her screen. It was Lena, sitting on a folding chair in that very room. Her left eye was swollen shut, a bruise blooming across her cheekbone like a dark flower. Her wrist was cuffed to the arm of the chair, and a large, heavy-set man stood behind her with his arms crossed, staring blankly at the lens. Bile rose in the throat of Veronica. She stared at the picture, her mind racing. They did not just want the $3,000. She saw the pattern clearly now. If she paid this, next week it would be $5,000, then 10. They were not looking for a payout. They were looking for leverage. They wanted to turn Lena, and by extension, Veronica and her access to banking systems into a permanent asset. They would use Lena's clean record to launder money, or worse, force her to transport drugs as a form of debt repayment. She looked at the banking app, open on her screen. The cursor blinked in the transfer field. Veronica made a decision that turned her blood to ice. She would not play their game. She would flip the board. Instead of hitting the standard transfer button, she navigated to the advanced transaction settings, a menu most users never knew existed. She entered the routing number for the account they had given her. Then, in the metadata field, usually reserved for internal banknotes, she typed a specific string of code she had learned during a seminar on financial crimes. She flagged the receiving account with a code 77 tag, high-risk terror finance. Immediate freeze. She was not just sending money. She was painting a target on their backs. The moment this transaction processed, federal algorithms would flag the account. The assets would be frozen instantly, and a notification would be sent directly to the Treasury Department. She looked at the door one last time, whispered a silent apology to her daughter for the chaos that was about to erupt, and pressed confirm. Veronica slipped her phone back into her coat pocket, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew the banking flag would buy her time, but it would also trigger an alarm. She needed physical backup, and she needed it now. She smoothed her hair, forced her posture to slump, and stumbled slightly as she re-entered the main bar area. She needed to look like just another overwhelmed patron, not a threat. She scanned the room and locked eyes with a young security guard near the VIP stairs. He looked newer than the others, his jawline less set, his eyes darting around with nervous energy. Veronica lurched toward him, grabbing his forearm with a grip that feigned desperation. "Please. You have to help me." She slurred slightly, leaning in close so only he could hear. "There is a girl being held in the back room. I heard them. I heard them demanding money to let her go. They are hurting her." The guard looked down at her, his expression a mask of confusion. For a second, he looked genuinely concerned, but then Veronica saw it, a tiny flicker in his eyes. It was not shock. It was recognition. He did not look surprised that a girl was being held. He looked calculating. "Keep your voice down. Lady?" he muttered, glancing at the nearby bartender. "Come with me. We will go out back. It is quieter there. I will call my supervisor." He guided her firmly by the elbow toward a heavy door marked with a glowing green exit sign. Veronica let him lead her, hoping her gamble would pay off, hoping that perhaps he was just following protocol. But as the door clicked shut behind them, the heavy thud echoed with finality. She found herself in a narrow concrete alleyway behind the club. The air was frigid and smelled of wet cardboard and trash. High brick walls boxed them in on 3 sides, and the only camera she could see was pointed toward the main street, leaving this specific corner in a blind spot. The young guard stood with his back to the door, His arms crossed over his chest, blocking her only exit. He pulled a radio from his belt and spoke 2 words into it. Problem outside. Moments later, a black patrol car with the markings of the Riverton Police Department rolled slowly into the mouth of the alley. The lights were off. There was no siren. A man in a uniform stepped out. He was older, with a thick waist and a face that looked like it had been eroded by years of apathy. The nameplate on his chest read, Sergeant Cole. Veronica rushed forward, relief flooding through her chest before she could stop to think. Officer, thank God. She gasped, fumbling to pull her phone out again. You need to get in there. They have my daughter. They are holding her for a debt she does not owe. Look, I have a photo and a recording. She thrust the screen toward him. Cole did not even look at the image of Lena battered and cuffed. He looked at Veronica, his eyes heavy with boredom. Ma'am, Cole said, his voice slow and patronizing. How much have you had to drink tonight? Veronica froze. The cold air suddenly felt sharper. She looked from Cole to the bouncer. The guard was not nervous anymore. He was smirking. A silent communication passed between them, a nod, a shifting of weight that screamed of familiarity. This was not a rescue. This was quality control. I am perfectly sober, Veronica said, her voice dropping the act, becoming razor sharp. I have audio of them threatening to kill her if I do not pay $3,000. That is extortion and kidnapping. Why are you not calling for backup? Cole stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of coffee and peppermint meant to cover up something stronger. Let me give you some advice, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing rumble. Pay the debt. Take your daughter home. Forget you ever walked into Eden Vault. A woman your age. You really do not want to get mixed up with the people who run this city. He was protecting them. He was likely getting a cut of every debt collected, every life ruined in that back room. The corruption did not just stop at the club doors. It ran through the veins of the very people meant to stop it. Veronica straightened her spine. The fear evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard anger that had fueled her career. She took a step toward Cole, forcing him to look her in the eye. I am the woman who helped Solace Wave uncover the Grey Rock money laundering scheme last year, she said, her voice steady and lethal. I know exactly what a financial trail looks like. Sergeant. And I know exactly what a police officer on a private payroll looks like. You think I am just a scared mother. I am a forensic auditor. And if you do not get out of my way, I will make sure Internal Affairs knows exactly how you paid for that boat you have docked at the marina. It was a bluff. She did not know if he had a boat, but she saw his eyes widen. The reference to Grey Rock, a scandal that had purged half the precinct, hit a nerve. For a second, he looked terrified. But then his face hardened. He realized he could not let her walk away now. You are under arrest for public disturbance and making false accusations. Cole barked, reaching for his belt. Cuff her. The bouncer stepped forward, his hands reaching for her arms. Veronica realized with a jolt that she had pushed too hard, too fast. She was trapped between a criminal and a crooked cop, and the law was no longer a shield. It was a weapon pointed straight at her. The young guard lunged forward, his hands reaching for the wrists of Veronica to pin them behind her back. Instead of pulling away, Veronica suddenly went limp. She feigned a drunken stumble, her knees buckling as she threw her entire body weight against his chest. The guard, expecting resistance rather than a collapse, lost his footing on the slick pavement. As he flailed to regain his balance, The radio clipped to his belt, dislodged, and skittered across the concrete. Veronica did not hesitate. She scrambled toward the device, kicked it further away, and then shouted toward the open microphone with all the lung capacity she possessed. "Officer down. We have an officer down at the rear exit. Suspect is armed." Sergeant Cole cursed loudly, a string of profanity that echoed off the brick walls. He stepped forward, his hand moving to his holster, his face twisted in fury. But before he could draw his weapon, the radio on his own shoulder crackled to life. The static cleared, replaced by the urgent, mechanical voice of the central dispatcher. "All units, hold positions. We have a code red federal alert triggered on the location. Repeat. Federal hold. FinCEN has flagged high-risk assets at Eden Vault. Do not engage until federal verification is complete." Veronica stood up, brushing the dirt from her coat. She watched the color drain from the face of Sergeant Cole. She knew exactly what had happened. Jamal had worked faster than she anticipated. Her Code 77 tag on the transaction had not just flagged the account. It had triggered an automated freeze that rippled up to the federal level, locking down the financial nervous system of the club. Cole looked at Veronica, and then at the camera mounted on the wall. He was trapped. If he arrested a key witness while a federal money laundering investigation was actively pinging the location, he would not just lose his badge, he would lose his pension and likely his freedom. He was corrupt, but he was not suicidal. He lowered his hand from his gun, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You have 5 minutes," Cole hissed, his voice barely audible over the wind. "After that, I cannot guarantee anything. If the feds clear the flag, I am coming in there, and I will drag you out myself." Veronica did not flinch. She stepped closer to him, her voice low and hard. 5 minutes for me to go back inside and get my daughter. In exchange, your name stays out of my initial report to the audit committee. For now." Cole ground his teeth, but he nodded sharply at the young guard. The bouncer, looking thoroughly confused and terrified, swiped his keycard against the reader. The heavy steel door clicked open. Veronica slipped back into the staff corridor. The silence here was heavier now, charged with the invisible pressure of the ticking clock. 5 minutes. It was not enough time to negotiate, but it was enough time to cause chaos. She pulled out her phone as she walked briskly down the hallway. Her fingers flew across the screen. "Need live backup. They are holding her in the back room. Trigger geotrace on my phone. Share with federal contact, now." The response from Jamal came almost instantly, the blue bubble popping up with reassuring speed. Pinged. "I have a buddy in the federal cyber unit on the line. They are watching the data stream. They said try to stay alive for at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes was a lifetime. She did not have 20 minutes. She had less than 5. Veronica stopped just short of the metal door where she had heard Lena earlier. She needed to escalate the situation. She needed to make sure that even if the local police tried to bury this, the digital footprint would be impossible to ignore. She opened her banking app one last time. She initiated a new transfer of exactly $1 to the Mule account. In the memo field, she typed a message designed to set off every alarm in the Department of Justice database Eden Vault, human trafficking debt collection payment. She pressed send. The digital breadcrumb was dropped. Now, every agent looking at that frozen account would see a direct allegation of human trafficking attached to the money flow. Veronica took a deep breath, steadying her shaking hands. She reached out and placed her palm against the cold metal of the door handle. She could hear the blood rushing in her ears, loud and rhythmic. "Okay, sweetheart," she whispered to herself, her eyes hardening. "This time, Mom is not just filing a report. Mom is breaking and entering." Veronica pushed the heavy door open just enough to slide her body through the gap. The air inside the office was stagnant, a suffocating blend of stale cigarette smoke, cheap leather, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. Lena was sitting on a folding metal chair in the center of the room. Her hands were pulled behind her back, secured tightly with black industrial zip ties that bit into her skin. Her eyes were red and swollen, wide with terror. But when she saw Veronica enter, her expression shifted violently, a mix of frantic relief and sudden, burning anger. Dante sat behind a scarred mahogany desk, leaning back with practiced ease. He was twirling a platinum credit card between his fingers, the plastic clicking rhythmically against his rings like a metronome counting down the seconds. Standing next to him was Ava, her thumbs flying across the screen of her phone, drafting a new threat to a number she did not realize was currently inside the room. Behind Lena stood a wall of a man, his neck covered in dark ink, his heavy hand resting loosely on her shoulder. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a reminder of weight and ownership. Veronica stepped fully into the room and let the door click shut behind her. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. $3,000 is a cheap price for a daughter, Veronica said, her voice unnaturally calm. That is why I am not paying it. The rhythmic clicking stopped. Dante caught the card between two fingers and looked up. He scanned Veronica from her sensible shoes to her tired face, his lips curling into a slow, amused smirk. "You made it. Good," Dante said, tossing the card onto the desk. "Usually, the mothers just cry on the phone and beg for more time. You are an exception." Veronica did not blink. She walked further into the room, her eyes dissecting the scene not as a mother looking at a crime, but as an auditor looking at a failing system. "I know what this is," she said, her tone clinical. "You recruit young girls with low credit limits. You manufacture a debt they cannot dispute. You force them to call home to extract cash from family assets. Then, you cycle the debt, keeping it just manageable enough so they do not run, but high enough that they never leave. Finally, you sell their identity data to the highest bidder on the dark web. It is not a gang, Dante. It is a pyramid scheme built on leverage." For a second, the arrogance faltered. Ava looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed. They were used to screaming, begging, and threats of police. They were not used to having their business model deconstructed like a quarterly financial report. "You are smart," Dante said, leaning forward. "But smart does not pay the bill. I paid something else." Veronica cut in. "I flagged the transfer I just sent. I tagged this account as high-risk terror finance. Every single dollar you take out of this room tonight is now a line item in a federal investigation. You are no longer petty financial criminals. On paper, right now, you are a national security threat." The color drained from the face of Ava. She understood the banking system well enough to know what that meant. Assets frozen, warrants issued automatically. No bail. "Dante," Ava whispered, her voice trembling. "If she did that." Dante waved his hand dismissively, though his jaw tightened. Federal warnings take weeks to reach a real person. He scoffed, standing up slowly. "They are just algorithms. But tonight, inside this room, the law is me. He nodded at the man standing behind Lena. The thug tightened his grip on the hair of the young girl, yanking her head back until she stared at the ceiling. Lena gasped, a sound of pure pain that tore at the heart of Veronica. Last choice. The man grunted, his voice like gravel. You transfer the money, and your daughter walks out on 2 good legs. You do not transfer it. Well, she pays the debt another way. We have buyers who pay a lot for girls who know how to stay silent. Mom, please. Lena choked out, tears streaming down her inverted face. Just go. Run. Veronica stared at the man, then at Dante. The time for talking was over. The time for auditing was done. She slowly lowered her handbag to the floor. As she did, she unzipped the main compartment. Her fingers brushed against the cold steel of the snub-nosed revolver hidden inside. She looked straight into the eyes of her daughter, projecting every ounce of resolve she had left. Do not be afraid, she thought, her fingers curling around the grip. This time, I am not turning my back on you. Veronica let out a long, shuddering breath, her shoulders slumping in apparent defeat. She held her phone up, the screen glowing brightly in the dim office. Okay. You win, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I am opening the transfer window now. Come and see. Dante smirked, stepping around the desk with the swagger of a man who believed he was untouchable. He leaned in close, his face filling the frame of the screen as he checked the numbers. He did not notice the small red icon blinking in the corner of the status bar. Veronica had not just opened the bank app. She had activated a live screen share session with Jamal. The camera was live. The microphone was hot. Dante tapped the glass with a manicured fingernail. See, that was not so hard, was it? On the other end of the connection, federal agents were getting a high-definition view of his face, the distinct tattoo of a serpent winding up his neck, and the heavy gold watch on his wrist that cost more than most people earned in a year. He was unknowingly signing his own indictment in real time. Suddenly, Lena jerked against her restraints. Don't do it. Mum, she screamed, her voice raw. Let them take me. I am the one who got into this mess. Just go. Veronica froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. For years, she had worried her daughter saw her only as a source of funds, a safety net to be used and discarded. But here, in this terrifying room, Lena was trying to cut the cord to save her. Dante threw his head back and laughed, a cruel, barking sound. Oh, look at the drama queen, he sneered, looking down at Lena. You think you are just a debtor, honey. Look at the paperwork. You are not just borrowing money. We put your name on 5 different holding accounts. You have been moving cash for us for months. If we go down, you go down as an accomplice. You are the mule, sweetheart. The blood drained from the face of Veronica. It was a classic entrapment technique. They had made Lena legally complicit, turning her into a shield. But Veronica did not crumble. Her mind, sharpened by years of auditing financial crimes, saw the flaw in their logic immediately. She looked Dante dead in the eye. Then you just created a bigger problem for yourself, she said, her voice turning to steel. If my daughter is an accomplice, that means she is a federal witness. If she goes to prison because of you, she will sing. She will tell them about every single dollar, every account, every name. And if you touch a single hair on her head, that is no longer debt collection. That is a federal capital murder case involving a witness. The smile vanished from the face of Dante. He realized, too late, that the trap had snapped shut on his own leg. Ava realized it first. She lunged forward, her eyes wide with panic. "Give me that phone." She grabbed the wrist of Veronica. The two women struggled, their breathing ragged. Veronica shoved Ava back, but the phone slipped from her sweaty grip and clattered onto the hardwood floor. It landed on its side, the camera lens pointing at an angle, capturing the shoes of everyone in the room and the chaotic audio of the fight. "Control her." Dante roared at the muscle behind the chair. The large man grunted and clamped his hand down hard on the shoulder of Lena, his fingers digging into her bruise. "Sit down," he bellowed. But Lena did not sit. A memory from a self-defense class Veronica had forced her to take 5 years ago flashed in her mind. "Use what you have." Lena planted her feet, gritted her teeth, and threw her upper body forward while thrusting her hips back. She used the metal chair as a battering ram, slamming the hard edge of the backrest directly into the groin of the man behind her. The man howled in agony, his grip releasing instantly as he doubled over and collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "Get away from her." The command cracked through the air like a whip. Veronica had reached into her bag. She stood there, her chest heaving. The snub-nosed revolver in her hand pointed strictly at the floor, but her finger was dangerously close to the trigger guard. "Enough," she hissed, her eyes darting between Dante and Ava. "No one touches my daughter again." Dante opened his mouth to speak, to threaten, to call her bluff, but the words died in his throat. From outside the thick walls of Eden Vault, a new sound began to penetrate the room. It started as a low wail and quickly multiplied into a cacophony of sirens. Blue and red lights began to flash rhythmically against the frosted glass of the office window, pulsing like a warning heartbeat. Dante looked at the window, then back at the gun, and finally at the phone on the floor that was still broadcasting everything. His party was over. The guests he had not invited had just arrived. The heavy bass that had been vibrating through the floorboards cut out instantly, leaving a ringing silence that was even louder than the music. Then, a voice amplified by a megaphone cut through the thick walls of the club, distorted but terrifyingly clear. "Federal agents, drop your weapons and step away from the hostages. We have the building surrounded." The announcement hung in the air like smoke. For 3 seconds, nobody in the office moved. It was as if the timeline of the night had snapped. Dante scrambled to the small, frosted window overlooking the street. He peered through the slats and recoiled as if he had been burned. Below, the street was a sea of flashing red and blue lights. A convoy of black SUVs blocked both ends of the alley, and a tactical team in heavy body armor was already stacking up at the rear entrance. Inside the room, the dynamic shattered. Ava let out a strangled yelp of panic. Her instinct for self-preservation kicked in, and she grabbed the arm of Lena, trying to pull the girl in front of her as a human shield. "No," Veronica shouted. She stepped forward, reducing the distance between them. Her hands were shaking, but her grip on the revolver was iron. She lowered the barrel slightly, aiming not at the head of Ava, but at her center mass. "There are no shields here," Veronica said, her voice trembling with adrenaline but clear enough to cut glass. "If you pull her 1 inch further, I will consider that intent to kill. Do not test a mother who has nothing left to lose." On the floor, the large man who had been groaning in pain saw his window of opportunity. He reached into his boot and pulled out a small, serrated blade. He shifted his weight, preparing to lunge at the exposed legs of Veronica. Veronica did not hesitate. She did not scream. She simply shifted her aim and squeezed the trigger. The gun went off with a deafening crack that sounded like a cannon in the small room. The bullet buried itself in the plaster wall less than 2 inches from the ear of the man. White dust exploded into the air, raining down on his face. He froze, the knife slipping from his sweaty fingers. I missed on purpose. Veronica lied, though her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break. Next time, I won't. Dante turned back from the window. He looked at the frozen accounts on his tablet. He looked at the tactical team outside. He looked at the determined woman holding a smoking gun. Finally. His eyes landed on the phone lying on the floor. The screen lit up with an incoming video call. It was Jamal. Veronica had set it to auto-answer. The face of Jamal appeared, split screen, with a stern-looking man in a suit wearing a federal badge. The voice of the agent blared from the tiny speaker. "We are recording this feed. Ms. Hale. We have visual on the suspects. Tell them to drop their weapons immediately, or we breach." Veronica did not look at the phone. She kept her eyes locked on Dante. "You heard him?" she said, her breathing ragged. "You have exactly 10 seconds to choose. You can walk out of here with your hands high and save your lawyer some work, or you can stay here and let them breach with the excuse of rescuing an armed hostage. Clock is ticking. Dante." Ava was the first to break. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I didn't sign up for this." She sobbed, her voice thin and pathetic. I just processed the bills. I didn't sign up for kidnapping." She raised her hands slowly, stepping away from Lena. The dominoes were falling. The thug on the floor kicked his knife away, sliding it across the linoleum until it hit the far wall. Dante stood alone. He looked at the platinum credit card still in his hand, the symbol of the empire he thought he built. He looked at Lena, the girl he thought was just another line item. He looked at Veronica, the auditor he had underestimated. He exhaled a long, shaky breath. He opened his fingers. The credit card fell, hitting the concrete floor with a tiny plastic click that sounded like the collapse of a mountain. "Do not shoot," Dante whispered. Seconds later, the door to the office splintered inward. Federal agents, get down, everybody down. The room flooded with black uniforms and blinding tactical lights. Men shouted orders. Dante was slammed against the desk. Ava was zip-tied. The chaos was overwhelming, a blur of motion and noise. Veronica stepped back. She opened her hand and let the revolver drop to the floor. She did not care about the agents screaming at her to show her hands. She dropped to her knees and pulled Lena into her arms. Lena buried her face in the shoulder of her mother, sobbing uncontrollably. Veronica held her tight, rocking her back and forth, her own tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. Through the broken window, the cold grey light of dawn was just beginning to creep in, mixing with the harsh red and blue strobe of the police cruisers. There was no warm fireplace waiting for them. There was no lecture to be given. There was just the smell of gunpowder, the cold morning air, and the fierce, unbreakable silence of a mother who had burned down a kingdom to save her child. Thank you so much for tuning in to this story. It was quite a ride. Wasn't it? I would love to know where you guys are listening from. Right now? Are you in the car? At the gym? Or maybe winding down for the night? Let me know in the comments below. I always love reading about where our community is hanging out. And hey, if you enjoyed this, Please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button so we can get this story out to even more people. Catch you in the next one.